final turn onto the old familiar dirt road was the moment I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times over the last 3 years. Flickering mental movie that had sustained me through the dust-choked chaos of Afghanistan was my anchor. The image that kept me grounded through endless patrols, through firefights in unnamed villages that smelled of cordite and fear, through the long, silent nights on watch, staring at alien stars. The image was simple. My family's cabin, a humble A-frame of cedar and stone, nestled in a protective grove of ancient pines, its porch overlooking the serene, blue-green expanse of Mirror Lake. It was the only real home I had ever known, a repository of every good memory I possessed. I had spent my childhood on that land, learning to fish for bass off the rickety dock with my dad, learning the names of the constellations from my mom as we lay on our backs on the cool grass in the summer. After they were killed in a tragic car accident during my first deployment, the cabin became more than just a property. It was a sanctuary of memory, a sacred trust. It's the last place on earth that still held the clear, ringing echo of their laughter. My honorable discharge papers felt heavy and final in the glove box of my beat-up Jeep Wrangler. I was done. We're done with the army, done with the desert, done with the constant grinding tension of a world perpetually at war. I was coming home, truly home, for the first time in my adult life. I took the final turn, my tires crunching on the familiar gravel, a sound that was music to my ears. I downshifted, anticipating the gentle slope that would reveal the cabin nestled by the water. My heart was thudding with a joyous, almost painful anticipation. I rounded the final bend in the road, my eyes fixed on the spot where my home should have been, and I saw nothing. No, not nothing. Something far worse than nothing. Where my small, rustic A-frame cabin should have stood, a place of quiet. Understated harmony with the land, there was now a monster. A house was too small a word for it. It was a mansion, a sprawling 3-story glass and stucco behemoth of aggressive, arrogant, modernist architecture. It was a palace of sharp angles and cold reflective surfaces, a gaudy monument to wealth and ego that looked as out of place in these quiet, ancient woods as a crashed spaceship. I slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust and disbelief. My brain simply could not process the image before me. This was a violation of the laws of physics, a glitch in the fabric of my own reality. I got out of the car on unsteady legs. My years of combat training, my ingrained discipline for staying calm under fire, completely deserting me. I was not a soldier in that moment. I was just a son whose home had been stolen, not just moved, but utterly erased from existence and replaced by this opulent sacrilege. I walked, stumbling, toward the massive gleaming front door of the alien structure. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth was gone, choked out by the chemical smell of fresh sod and industrial-grade fertilizer. My grandfather's handcrafted birdhouses, the rambling fieldstone walls my father had built by hand, stone by stone, over a dozen summers, all of it was gone. The land had been scraped clean, sterilized, and reimagined in a form I did not recognize. The front door of the mansion, 10-foot-tall slab of frosted glass and brushed steel, opened before I reached it. A woman in her late 50s, dressed in an expensive-looking white pantsuit. Her blonde hair styled in a severe architectural bob, stepped out onto the marble porch. Her face was a mask of cold, imperious annoyance, and her eyes swept over my dusty Jeep in my travel-worn military fatigues with clear disdain. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that can only be purchased with immense, generational wealth. "This is a private residence. You're trespassing." "Trespassing," I whispered, the word feeling foreign and absurd in my mouth as I stood on the spot where my own front porch used to be. This is my property, my cabin. Where's my cabin?" The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to a look of pitying contempt, the kind one might give to a confused, rambling drunk. "Oh, you must be one of the previous owner's relatives. I'm so sorry for your confusion." That dilapidated old shack was a safety hazard, an eyesore. It was demolished 2 years ago when I purchased this prime lakefront lot. I am Victoria Sterling, and this is my home. Now, I'll have to ask you to leave my property before I call security." I stared at her, my mind reeling. The words "purchased this lot" and "demolished" echoing in the ringing silence of my ears. "Couldn't have," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of profound grief and a rising volcanic rage. "This land wasn't for sale. It belongs to me, Sergeant Alex Thorne. I've been away." Our eyes narrowed. She saw the military-style haircut, the duffel bag in the back of my Jeep, the profound shock and anguish on my face. A flicker of something, was it recognition? Fear crossed her features before it was quickly replaced by a steely, impenetrable resolve. "I have a legally recorded quiet title deed filed with and approved by the county court. My attorneys handled everything," she said, her voice now hard and final as a judge's gavel. "The property was declared legally abandoned. You are mistaken. Now leave." She turned and walked back inside, the heavy door closing with a soft, dismissive click, leaving me alone in the shadow of the monstrous house that stood on the grave of my own history. For the next 2 days, I lived in a cheap, anonymous motel in the nearby town, operating on pure, focused fury. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I went to the county records office, a place I hadn't been since I'd sat with my father to settle my grandparents' estate years ago. I started digging, pulling the heavy, dust-covered volumes of property records, my hands moving with a desperate urgency. The story that unfolded was a masterpiece of calculated predatory fraud. Victoria Sterling, the president of the newly formed Sterling Point HOA that now surrounded my land, had indeed filed a quiet title action too. Years ago. It's a legal process used to clear up ownership of a property that is considered abandoned. In her sworn affidavit, a document I held in my trembling hands, she had claimed that the property's owner of record, my deceased parents, had left. No heirs. She had sworn under penalty of perjury that she had made a diligent and exhaustive effort to locate any next of kin, and had found none. She had stated that the property had been abandoned for years, its taxes unpaid. It was a lie, a calculated, venomous, and profoundly evil lie. I was the sole heir, a fact clearly stated in my parents' will, which was on file in this very courthouse. My property taxes, which covered the land and the cabin, had been paid automatically every year from my military combat pay. A fact the county tax assessor's office confirmed for me in a single 3-minute phone call. And my address, my APO military forwarding address, was on file with both the IRS and the United States Postal Service. I was not unfindable. I was a soldier, serving my country overseas in a combat zone, and she had used my service, my absence, as a weapon against me. She had stolen my home while I was fighting in a foreign land. The quiet title action had gone through the court unopposed. Of course, how could I have opposed it? I was in a forward operating base in Kandahar, completely unaware that a legal battle for my home was being waged and lost in my absence. The court, presented with her fraudulent affidavit and the perjured testimony of a process server who claimed he couldn't find me, had granted her a default judgment, awarding her the title to my abandoned land. With that fraudulent deed in hand, she had obtained demolition permits, now bulldozed my family's cabin, and built her palace on its ruins. I sat in the dusty, silent basement of the courthouse. The evidence of her crime spread before me, and the all-consuming grief I felt was slowly being replaced by something cold, hard, and unbreakable. It was the same focused, implacable resolve I had felt on the battlefield. This was no longer just a property dispute. This was a mission. I knew I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed a specialist. I made a call to a veterans support network, and they gave me a name, a lawyer in the state capitol who specialized in one particular and very powerful, a piece of federal legislation, the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the SCRA. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Frank Patterson, who was a retired JAG officer, met with me the next day. I laid out the documents, the timeline of my deployment, the fraudulent, quiet title action. He listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When I was finished, he looked at the file, then at me, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Sergeant Thorne," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with a fury that matched my own. She didn't just commit fraud. She committed fraud against a deployed soldier in a combat zone. She used your service against you to steal your home. This is the single most egregious violation of the SCRA I have ever personally seen. Leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk.
Oh.
They're going to regret this. They're going to regret the day they ever heard your name. We're not just getting your land back, son. We are taking everything. The legal battle was not a protracted war of attrition. It was a swift, brutal, and decisive surgical strike. Our first move was to file an emergency motion in federal court to vacate the fraudulent default judgment based on the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The SCRA is a federal law that provides a wide range of legal and financial protections for active duty military members. Its most powerful provision is the one that protects soldiers from having default judgments entered against them in civil cases if their military service demonstrably prevented them from responding. My case was a textbook, almost cartoonishly perfect example of what the law was designed to prevent. Victoria Sterling's high-priced corporate lawyers were immediately on the defensive. They arrived at the first hearing radiating an aura of bored, expensive confidence, clearly expecting to have this minor inconvenience dismissed. Their confidence visibly crumbled as our lawyer, Frank Patterson, laid out our case. He was not a flashy litigator. He was a former Marine colonel from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and he presented his arguments with the cold, methodical precision of a battle plan. We presented my deployment orders, which covered the entire period of the quiet title action. We presented the certified mail receipts for the original court notices, which had been returned as undeliverable from my empty cabin while I was dodging IEDs halfway across the world. We presented the county tax records showing my uninterrupted, on-time payments, and the post office records showing my active military forwarding address. We presented, in short, an irrefutable mountain of evidence that proved Victoria Sterling's. The entire case had been built on a foundation of perjury. The federal judge, stern-faced woman named Alice Wright, who, I later learned, was a West Point graduate and a former Army prosecutor, listened to the evidence with a look of barely concealed fury. The hearing to vacate the judgment lasted less than an hour. She did not just grant our motion. She did so with extreme prejudice and wrote a scathing, 10-page opinion on the predatory, conscionable, and morally reprehensible nature of the plaintiff's actions against a deployed service member. The original quiet title was voided. The fraudulent deed was nullified. In the eyes of the law, as of that moment, the title to my family's land was fully and legally restored to me. But that was only the first phase. Now came the matter of the house. It's a monstrous multi-million-dollar mansion that was currently and very solidly sitting on my land. Victoria's lawyers immediately shifted tactics. They conceded that the land was mine. Their new strategy was to argue for good faith improvement. They claimed that their client, Mrs. Sterling, had acted in good faith, believing the property to be legally hers, and had made a significant improvement to the land by building her home. They offered to pay me for the assessed value of the empty lot, a sum they calculated at a paltry $200,000. While she would, of course, keep the mansion, and we would redraw the property lines. This is where Frank Patterson earned his formidable reputation. He didn't just argue against their claim, he eviscerated it. He introduced Victoria Sterling's sworn, perjured affidavit into the record as Exhibit A. He introduced the testimony of a local postmaster, who confirmed my military forwarding address had been active and that they had, in fact, forwarded mail to it. He brought in a title search expert who testified that even a novice researcher could have found me, the sole legal heir, with less than an hour of work. He presented a damning email, recovered during discovery, from Victoria to her lawyer, which read, "Don't worry about the soldier. He's in a war zone. Let's just get this done before he comes back." "Your Honor," Frank thundered in the courtroom, his voice echoing off the marble walls. This was not a good faith improvement. This was a calculated act of predatory fraud. The defendant, Miss Sterling, did not make a mistake. She told a series of deliberate lies under oath to steal the home of a soldier while he was deployed in a combat zone, assuming he might not return at all? This is the very definition of bad faith, and under this state's long-standing law of accession. When an improvement is made to a property in bad faith, the improver is not entitled to compensation. In fact, the improvement itself, structure, the building, the house, legally becomes part of the land it sits upon. The improvement exceeds to the land, and thus it belongs to the rightful owner of the land. The courtroom was silent. Victoria Sterling, sitting at the defendant's table, had gone a ghostly shade of white. Her lawyers were shuffling papers, their faces grim. They knew he was right. They had been outmaneuvered and utterly defeated. The final day in court was a formality. The judge, her voice dripping with contempt for Victoria, delivered her verdict. She not only affirmed my sole, unencumbered ownership of the land, but, citing Ms. Sterling's fraudulent and malicious bad faith actions, she ruled that all improvements made to the land were now legally part of the land itself. The mansion, all 10,000 square feet of it, with its infinity pool, its marble floors, and its panoramic lake views, belonged to me, free and clear. I had taken everything back, the scene of Victoria Sterling and her family moving their belongings. Out of my new mansion 2 weeks later was a quiet, surreal affair. There was no shouting, no drama. There was only the quiet, efficient work of movers packing up expensive furniture and fine art, loading it into vans under the watchful eye of 2 sheriff's deputies who were there to enforce the court's order. Victoria would not meet my eye. She had lost everything: the house, the land, and a significant portion of her fortune in legal fees and court-ordered damages. Her reputation was in tatters. Her reign as the Queen of Sterling Point brought to a sudden and ignominious end. That left me with a profound and unexpected dilemma. What in God's name was I going to do with this opulent, soulless mansion that stood on the grave of my family's cabin? I didn't want it. Every inch of it felt tainted by the greed and arrogance of its creator. To live in it would be to live inside a monument to the very thing I despised. I found the answer a month later. After extensive consultations with my lawyer and a team of financial advisors from a veterans charity, the final scene of the story took place not in a courtroom, but on the grand marble patio of the mansion. Overlooking the lake my family had cherished for generations, I was surrounded not by lawyers but by a crowd of smiling, grateful people. News cameras flashed. The Sterling Point Mansion, as it has been called, was built on a foundation of deceit. On land stolen from a soldier, I said, my voice carrying over the assembled crowd. Today, we are going to build a new legacy. On that same land, a legacy of service, healing, and honor. I announced that I was donating the entire property of the mansion, the land, everything, to a nationally recognized nonprofit organization that provides recuperative, all-expenses-paid retreats for wounded veterans and their families. The property, once a symbol of my own family's peace, would now be a sanctuary for hundreds of other military families, a place for them to heal from the wounds of war, both visible and invisible. I stood on that patio, the legal owner for only a few more minutes before the deed was officially transferred, and looked out at the lake my grandfather had loved. I had lost my cabin, the physical structure of my past. But in its place, I had been given the opportunity to create something far greater. I had transformed an act of profound greed and disrespect into a powerful, enduring legacy of service and healing, a far greater tribute to my family and my country than a small cedar cabin ever could have been.